Hi, I'm Josh Ewald. This is Week 2 Economics. In this presentation, we'll cover economic concepts such as supply and demand, the law of supply and demand, equilibrium price and quantity, and more. First off, let's start by defining what is supply, what is demand, and what are these laws that they abide by. In a basic sense, demand is the relationship between price and the quantity demanded of a certain good or service. But so I can internalize information better, I need a picture painted. For example, if everyone suddenly wanted the latest smartphone, demand is high. If the price is low, even more people might want it. But if the price is too high, demand will go lower. So demand is about how badly people want something and how much they're willing to spend for it. Supply is the relationship between the price and the quantity supplied of a certain good or service. Think of it this way, if you're selling lemonade, the higher price people are willing to pay, the more lemonade you will want to make because you know you'll make more money. While lower pricing or lowering the current price will stimulate demand to maintain consistent and growing sales for the business. So supply basically has to do with how much of something is available and how the seller is making it attainable. Now let's talk about those laws. The word law is the most widely used term to use when speaking on the subject, but I like to point out that these are not statutes. These are observations on behaviors or documentations of change. It's information that's used to predict consumer choices or evaluate business options. Law of demand. By definition, a higher price leads to a lower quantity demanded of a certain good or service, and a lower price leads to a higher quantity demanded. Remember the lemonade thing? Law of supply. A higher price leads to a higher quantity shipped, and a lower price leads to a lower quantity shipped. Just think of how much money last year's iPhone cost when it came out versus how much it costs after a new model is released. Now let's look at 6 key graphs that demonstrate how supply and demand can change in a market. But first, I have a couple more definitions to go over. Equilibrium price. Equilibrium price. The price where quantity demanded is equal to the quantity supplied. Just hold that. Equilibrium quantity. The quantity at which quantity demanded and quantity supplied are equal for a certain price level. Stick with me. Over equilibrium, we're going to reference that as surplus. Under equilibrium, we're going to reference that as shortage today. Now, with all that in mind and all this talk of price and quantity, how do we interpret that data? We put it in a graph. There were some technical difficulties, so I just wanted to run through these 6 key charts here. The basic supply and demand chart would look something like this. You would have a vertical line, which would show the price, a horizontal line, which would show the quantity. And these lines would cross as the quantity goes up, the demand or price would go down. They would meet at certain points. That certain point is called the equilibrium price. And that's the basic things that we would need to know here in this graph. And going forward, I wanted to show what an increase of supply would look like. So we could see the price is indicated here by the P1 and P2 at the bottom here. You can see the Q1 and Q2 is for quantity. That just means Q1 is what it started as, Q2 is what it ended as. Same for supply. And we could see with the arrow indicating that the line moved to the right from the supply 1 to the supply 2, showing that there was an increase of supply. And it also would show that the equilibrium price now has moved to the right. So as the supply went up, the price went down because there was a surplus, and so the consumer got to capitalize on that. If there was a decrease of supply, we'll see the arrow going the opposite way now in this screen. You'll see the S1 and S2 over here for supply has reversed. On the left side, the P1 and P2 have reversed. On the bottom, the Q1 and Q2 have reversed. The equilibriums can be in the same spot in this scenario, but the main thing that changed is that you'll notice that the equilibrium price moved to the left, increasing in cost because as the supply became more, as did the price because there was a higher demand. On the next screen, we'll see an increase of demand, the same scenario, but the demand is going in the opposite direction here. And we'll see D1 and D2, and that's indicating an increase of demand here, but also the equilibrium price we could see made a shift to the right, along with the supply line remaining the same. On the next screen, we'll see a decrease of demand. It's the opposite with the arrow, and the D1 and D2 are now exchanged. The supply stayed the same, but the demand was decreased, showing that the equilibrium price would move to the left and also decreased in price. So we'll notice that on the P1 and P2. And then for a shift in both supply and demand, we'll see D1 and D2 indicating that there was an increase in demand. We'll see an S1 and S2 showing that there is an increase in supply. We'll show a P1 and P2 showing that there was a previous and post price, and the Q1 and Q2 indicating that quantity has changed in some form. And with that, we can see that the equilibrium price has moved to the right because there was an increase in both scenarios in this one. For a opposite scenario where you'd see a decrease, shift the arrow, and then you would also notice that the equilibrium price would be shifted then to the left. Each of these graphs highlight how price and quantity adjust when supply and demand change. Let's check out some examples. Let's analyze how global events can affect the market for oil. For each scenario, we'll evaluate how supply, demand, equilibrium price, and quantity are affected from these shifts and movements. Cars are becoming more fuel efficient and therefore get more miles to the gallon. What's the outcome of this? Consumers would need less oil. Oil prices would decrease because there's less of a demand of it. Equilibrium would be in surplus and would shift left on our graph. The winter is exceptionally cold. Consumers are colder, so they will use more oil for heat. So oil prices would increase because there's more of a demand. The equilibrium is now in shortage, so it would shift right. A major discovery of new oil is made off the coast of Norway. Companies are now in abundance of the product. The prices will decrease because the supply is high. The equilibrium results in a surplus and would shift left. The economies of some major oil-using nations like Japan slow down. Prices will decrease. Demand went down. The equilibrium will now be in surplus and shift left. A war in the Middle East disrupts oil pumping schedules. The prices will increase. The supply chain is being disrupted. There's less product available. Equilibrium results in a shortage and would shift right. Landlords install additional insulation in buildings. The oil billing would decrease because less oil is being used to heat the structure. Because the building can now retain heat more efficiently, the equilibrium would now be in surplus and would shift left. The price of solar energy falls dramatically. Prices will decrease because the market would then be trending in the direction of solar, and the oil company's best way to entice customers to stick with them would be to decrease price. Equilibrium would be in surplus and would shift left. Chemical companies invent a new popular kind of plastic made from oil. The price will decrease. There is now more of a limited resource and an abundance of supply. Equilibrium would be in surplus and shift left. So what causes these changes? It could be anything from changes in demand to quantity demanded to supply to quantity supplied. And now I'm sure you're probably asking, what's the difference between all those? Change in demand could be several factors like product features, competition, taste, size, preferences, expectations, and of course the current price. The quantity demanded is the total number of units consumers are willing to purchase at a given price. Supply. Now in this context, what's supply? It's the range of prices and the quantity supplied at those prices. Quantity shift is the total number of units producers are willing to sell at that price range. Don't confuse surplus with shortages. Here are the key surpluses with some examples. Consumer surplus. By definition, the extra benefit consumers receive from buying a good or service measured by what the individuals would have been willing to pay minus the amount that they actually paid. What that means to me, I went to the store for pants. I planned on spending $75. I only spent $40. Consumer surplus, $35. Product surplus. By definition, the extra benefit producers receive from selling a good or service, measured by the price the producer received minus the price the producer would have been willing to accept. What that means to me, a woodworker builds a Batman-themed end table. The woodworker knows that a basic end table may cost $80, but to a Batman fanatic, he could charge $400. So if the woodworker receives $400, but could have accepted $80, his producer surplus is $320. For finding a niche that has a high demand for a product that woodworker makes. Which leads us to social surplus. And that's just the sum of consumer surplus and producer surplus. And the formula looks like this. Consumer surplus plus producer surplus equals social surplus. That wraps up week 2 for economics. I hope that I've shown how supply and demand are the foundation of how markets operate, influence prices, and plan for production and consumption. By understanding these concepts, we gain valuable insights into market trends and economic behavior. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much. My name is Josh Ewald.